Well, hi everyone. I hope you enjoyed that little slideshow. So you can see a couple of pictures from the fires. Staff, I'll go ahead and invite you to turn your cameras on. And in just a moment, I'm also going to figure out how I can let you guys unmute yourselves. Donors, if any of you would like to keep or turn your cameras on, you're more than welcome to do so. If you want to keep them off, that is completely okay as well. Whatever makes you feel the most comfortable. Stacy, if you can do me a favor, can you just check and see if you can unmute yourself now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Thank you. As I was starting this, I was like, okay, everyone stay muted, and then realized if I did that, then none of my staff could talk. So welcome everybody. For those of you who might not know me, my name is Andrea. I am the Donor Relations Coordinator here at SPCA Monterey County. And thank you for joining our Yappy Hour and coming to hear a little bit more about how we responded to the fires that we had recently. So I'm going to do just a brief intro. For anybody who hasn't used Zoom before, if you're on a laptop, if you go up to your top right corner, there's a little area where you can change the view of what you're seeing. So you do a speaker view, you can do a gallery view, whatever is great for you. Please feel free to do that. And then there is a chat feature. If you take your mouse down towards the bottom, you'll see chat is one of the features. And you can send a chat in and you can ask whatever questions you may have. And we will get to as many of those questions as we also have a couple of questions that were sent in before when people were logging in and registering for this. So we have a couple of questions up our sleeve. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, starting with Scott. Scott is our president and CEO. Scott, you want to give a wave? Just make sure everyone knows who you are. So Scott joined the SPCA team in 2016, prior to the Sobranas fires. So he had some good experience coming in with that. Scott did a little bit of everything during the fires. He delivered breakfast. He made a lot of supply runs. He moved animals in crates. And I think the best part for Scott is he was just an amazing cheerleader to all of the staff, doing kind of whatever we needed, scaling walls, which was my favorite part. And he worked very closely with Rosanna. And Rosanna is our Vice President of Operations. She's been with the SPCA for over a decade, 11 years. And Rosanna was the incident commander, and she oversaw everything that came to our disaster response, and definitely could not have done anything without her. Also on the call, we have Stacy. Stacy is our Vice President of Development. She has been with the SPCA for 14 years now. And Stacy was the coordinator for all of our farm animals and livestock at the Monterey County Fairgrounds, the Marina Equestrian Center, the Salinas Rodeo Grounds, and the Salinas Valley Fairgrounds. And I'm pretty sure Stacy would agree, she has a newfound love of chickens. Also here we have Sierra. She is our Wildlife Center manager, has been with the SPCA since 2015, and she was our point person for evacuation of wild animals, as well as any of the exotics we had, both exotics that had been in our care, as well as those that were evacuated from the fires. We also have Jenny, who is the Vice President of Shelter and Veterinary Services. She joined the team in 2015, and she was our point person. No, I'm sorry, 2005. I got you. And she was our point person for evacuating the entire shelter and coordinating the response at the shelter, and then again when we were at the Monterey County Fairgrounds. And then last but not least, we have Amanda, who's our Behavior and Training Manager. She's been with the SPCA for 16 years. And during the fires, I would say Amanda probably had one of the most critical roles, as she was the one who was coordinating our transport efforts. So as people were calling and saying that they needed to be evacuated, Amanda was telling them where to go, and then coordinating with those staff that were at those various locations, telling them that people were on their way. She also coordinated the staff going to help people evacuate their animals. And then, like I said, my name is Andrea. I officially joined the SPCA staff last year, although I was a volunteer for a number of years before that. I was in charge of feeding, all of the staff and volunteers and worked our on-site donation items. So just in case you didn't want to do the math, on this call, you have about 70 years of experience just at this SPCA. That doesn't count anyone who worked at any kind of organization before this. So it's a pretty amazing panel that we have. So I'm really excited for this. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott for a few other welcoming words.
Thank you, Andrea. In dog years, that's only about 10 years of experience, though, I think. Isn't that right? Isn't that how the math goes? So thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for all your support. I mean, we can't do the good work that we do without you. And it's just, I mean, in many ways, the fires feel like they were so long ago. Because time is just so strange during our COVID times. So that's why it's also interesting to see and nice to see so much interest, even though this effort was a couple months ago. Can everyone hear me okay? Should have said that first, great. We talked a lot about this whole effort being unprecedented. The SPCA has never seen anything like this. We didn't have one fire. We didn't have two fires. We had 3 fires happening at one time in our county. We had individual staff who were impacted. We had people who were evacuated from their own homes or had evacuation advisories. So people dealing with some pretty heavy stuff at home. We evacuated our own shelter. So we've been here, I think, close to 60 years or so, and we have never had to evacuate our shelter. We had a plan for that, fortunately, but we've never had to do that. We managed multiple offsite facilities and managed more than 1,000 animals. Oh yeah, and there was this little thing called COVID happening all at the same time. So this is something really that, I mean, we couldn't have imagined all this happening the way it did. We weren't perfect. I don't know any organization that possibly could have been perfect in something like this. We talked a lot about our work after the fact. We were very critical of our own role and talked about things that we could do differently or better next time. And we also recognized it was important to recognize just how much went right too. And that was a real testament to the people we have on our staff and all that experience that you heard about. We did a lot of things right. And I just wanted to make sure staff focused on that. We had some serious moments and we're going to talk about some of those. We also had some lighter moments, and I'm thinking of Jenny communicating with hunky Hollywood actors. I'm thinking about Jamie wrestling and tackling emus and naughty tortoises getting timeouts at the Monterey County Fairgrounds. So we had, it was important, I think, for us to, have some of those lighter moments too, because what we were dealing with was some pretty heavy stuff. So again, I just want to thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to the questions. We're all going to jump in, and I will give it back to Andrea now.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, those happy moments, I think, is really what we want to focus on. And because there were some good ones. I mentioned Scott scaling walls, and to the end of time, that will be like one of my favorite all-time maze. One thing I forgot to mention in my kind of housekeeping is the fact that this call is being recorded. That way we'll be able to send it out to those that weren't able to join us, but all of you will get it as well. So you can look back on us fondly with smiles. So I've got my first question, Scott. I'm actually going to throw it right back to you. Were all the animals evacuated from the fires reclaimed by their owners?
Yeah, I think we had one that was surrendered to us, one or two surrendered to us. And I don't know, we wouldn't really talk about our expectation, but I guess if anything, I'm a little bit surprised. I figured we would have, with all the animals in our care, we would have had a few more surrendered to us, and that would have been okay. We had people who lost everything. We were caring for their animals. If anything, I'm a little bit surprised. I mean, it's wonderful that all the animals went back to their owners except for those one or two. And if more would have been surrendered to us, I think we would have been okay with that. We would have been ready for that. But I guess if anything, I'm a little surprised that we didn't see more animals surrendered to us.
Yeah, great to see all those animals going back home. All right, Rosanna, we're coming to you because I think this is one of the most asked questions we had. And it's going to be like our Christmas song. How many animals did we care for? And can you give us a list of how many animals were in the SPCA care, dogs, cats, horses, emus? Give us the list.
So it was very hard to track day to day because we changed often, and especially with the intensity of the evacuation orders either being given or lifted. The most animals that we know that we had in care on one day was right around 1,100. And that's everything from goldfish, shipseer, we had a couple of fish, didn't we? For the majority of them being cats, dogs, and horses, and then an unprecedented amount of chickens. We had chickens, there were just chickens everywhere. Every place we could stick chickens, there were chickens. And then up, of course, to our larger horses. And the biggest one that I know of that we had in our care that we transported, it was a 650-pound pig.
We definitely like to have a wide variety of animals in our care, hence Stacy's newfound love of chickens. Stacy, would you like to take a moment to express your love of chickens?
So one of the interesting things is, people associate evacuating animals with being cats and dogs. Well, we were having dispatch, basically calls would come in, people would say what they have, and we'd let them know where they should take those animals. And so we were coordinating with different offsite facilities. And so we'd start with 2 chickens. And then all of a sudden it got to, well, I have 96-ish chickens. And to find housing for that many chickens is pretty surreal. So we had an amazing group of staff and volunteers. We built structures because chickens can fly. So they had to be secure all around. You had to separate sometimes roosters and hens, whatever it might be. And when the chickens would arrive to the facility, you then also have to offload them. So one of the highlights was late one night. I mean, we literally offloaded probably 100 chickens, one by one by one. I've never handled so many chickens in my life. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, chickens and poultry, we also had someone bringing in 26 ducks. So it was these calls where the original concept would have been like, okay, well, we'll put this person's 3 chickens here. No one had 3 chickens. No one did. I mean, everyone had multiples times 3. So it was a little unique, but it also helped us plan for the future. A lot more people are doing backyard chickens, and a lot of our rural areas were being evacuated. And so that is going to be a very different type of animal being evacuated than possibly your suburbs. So I love chickens. They're very friendly.
And along that same vein, Stacy, we see the cats and dogs, obviously, but people can take those with them. You can take them to that hotel or take them to a friend's house. Hotels, I don't think, are chicken friendly or duck friendly as often around here.
Not necessarily. I'm sure some people did sneak some chickens into some places, but what was amazing is also how people evacuate is, once again, your cats and dogs you might easily be able to put into a crate. Chickens, once again, were being created. I mean, people would drive up in an SUV and there'd be their pig in the back of it. So you just never know when people are pulling up what they were going to open and release to us. So it kept us on our toes. But yes, I don't think many hotels would be excited to have a bunch of chickens squawking around.
Probably not, but it'd be fun to be the neighbor. And don't forget, if you all have extra questions that I know I'm still have lots to get to, but don't forget that chat feature is there, so you can come and ask if anything sparks your interest. Please do so. So this question and answer is going to be a bit more of a round table. So for this next question, we're going to hear from all of our staffers. So Stacy, you kind of mentioned already, an obstacle and something to learn from the future is, how do we house chickens, especially because we were housing a lot of them in what I would think of as more of a pig stall, something you would see at obviously it was the county fair because we were at the fairgrounds. And so that was kind of an obstacle, something to learn from. But I want to hear from everybody as well. What were some of your most rewarding moments? What is that moment that you look back on and you were just like, this is why I do what I do? And then maybe some of the obstacles we had. So Stacy, do you want to go again? And then we'll come on over to Rosanna.
Sure. Obstacles, it was once again housing the variety of animals. They were coming in. When evacuation orders would come across, we would usually get a text message, and they were coming so quickly at some points in time. The phones were ringing off the hook. I mean, the amount of phone calls that were coming in, and we wanted to keep family units together. So the dogs and cats could possibly come to the shelter, but if they had 37 chickens, 2 goats, a horse, and a pig. Where could all those animals be housed together? And so we worked with the different facilities to accommodate those. And so we had staff housing or in charge of each area. And so it'd be like, what's your current inventory? What do you have the space for? And then if it didn't exist, building it out in some cases. And so having that space already by the time the owners arrived, because they might get an evacuation warning or an advisory. And so we would try and work according to that. And so it's just working with that and just getting housing. And once again, I mean, win for everyone who's willing to pick up supplies for us, and then just getting those safe structures built out for the animals, making sure we have the appropriate feeding devices. The chicken's going to feed out of a very different device than a horse, building that out. And then rewarding wise, you know, you see people come in and it's probably one of the lowest points. They're coming in and they're really struggling, and just the relief of them being able to hand that animal off to you so they could go deal with whatever it might need. Some people needed housing for a couple of weeks. Some people might just need it for a couple of days till they figure out that next step. And so, you know, you'd have the mayhem during the day where everyone's coming in, just animals upon animals coming in. And I have to say, for me, I loved walking around late at night after everyone had gone home, and just all the animals are relaxing, they're eating, and it was just that you guys are safe. You know, you're in a good spot right now. And just knowing that they're taken care of for as long as they need to be. And then, of course, the going home. We had a couple of goats that were one of the last to leave, and the gentleman pulled up in his truck yelling at the goats. I mean, they started, you know, talking back to them. They were so excited, and he loaded him up in his truck, not in the pickup bed, but in the back seat, and took off with them. I mean, just so many smiles coming out of that.
That's where goats belong, is your co-pilot, right? All right, Rosanna, let's hear from you, and then we'll come down to Amanda.
Very similar to Stacy, I think an obstacle with these fires was the depth and breadth of them. It happened so fast and so different and so big that it was, and all of it during a pandemic, as Scott mentioned. So we were dealing with hurdles we'd never had to deal with before. So it was a lot of new, okay, we used to do it like that, but we can't do it like that anymore. How do we do it now in these times and in this situation? But by far my most rewarding of this is just, this is when our team shines. I mean, we have amazing people that work here, and I've got, you know, people that were, I had 4 people in my office all trying to answer phone calls at the same time at 11 o'clock at night. And we've got customer care who's already worked a full 8-hour shift. They're staying past that to help people who are showing up at the door who are tired and scared, and still providing everyone with that smile and that don't worry, we got you, even though they're tired. And it is just a truly amazing team that we have here.
Yeah, seeing that camaraderie was amazing. So Amanda, let's hear from you, and then Sierra.
Okay, so I mean, the challenges, yeah, there are a lot of logistics that we were dealing with, especially with the incoming calls. You're dealing with people who are extremely emotional and worried about their animals, whether if they have their animals with them or if they were on the other side of the fire line and unable to get them, the worry of what's going to happen to their animals. So being able to help the people work through that and get them the peace of mind, whether they're calling to find out where they can take their animals, and being able to set that up for them and getting their information. One of the big obstacles we did come across is at times the fire was not cooperating with the firefighters, and so it would let us go into some areas where we knew the animals were, and that's something, you know, I would be sitting there staring at a list of homes and animals that I were just itching to get out to help and to get them to safety or to get them fed and watered. And when we were able to get back there and to help those animals, that was a huge relief for our staff, because getting our staff out there, we were all wanting to help, and also being able to call the owners and tell them that their animals are safe and they're being taken care of, and or that we have been able to take them back to the shelter, and for them to be able to go see them was huge for the owners' peace of minds. We also would get surprises. We had a call, we went out to go, somebody had seen a dog, was one of the sheriff's officers. We went out there to go get the dog. I sent staff out. We ended up finding the owner, ended up getting back there. So the owner took the dog, but they had a whole herd of ducks that we instead loaded up the vehicle, a little Subaru, got a little dectified, and we send them off to Stacy, which Stacy is probably shaking her head when I was sending her the info on that one. So there was always, there's surprises. We not always come back with the animals that we were expecting, or we'd come back with a few extras on there. But being able to help people, and I know when we were out there, staff, when owners would be honking at us and rolling down their windows, them thanking us for going back behind the fire lines to help their animals, and it was just one of those things that you can't replace, to give those people that safety net.
And Amanda, you bring up a really good point. So much of what we talk about is the animals away from the property, away from the home. But that's not all we did. We went to people's houses just to check on those animals, feed them, make sure that they had food, which is, I think, something we didn't think about as much as just moving the animals out and bring them here. So that's really important.
Yes, there was actually one person who stayed back, was behind the fire lines, and her home stood, had made it through the fire, but her barn had burned along with several of her neighbors' homes, which she ended up taking her neighbors' animals in, a lot of livestock. And so she was out there without supplies, and that what we were able to do was the team rallied, and we got all the supplies that she needed to feed the cows, horses, chickens, cats, and dogs. I mean, she had a whole farm going on there that she had collected from the neighbors, farms, and being able to get her those supplies to keep the animals taken care of till the neighbors could get back, because she couldn't leave. If she left her property, she would not have been able to get back on.
Wow, that's some strength right there. All right, Sierra, let's hear from you, and then we're going to come on over to Jenny.
Yeah, so it's been said by some of the other staff already, but just being able to provide housing and food for the menagerie of animals that people had, people calling, I have a goldfish. Yes, we can hold your goldfish. I have a 8-foot snake. Yes, we can take your 8-foot snake. I have 6 sulcatas. Yes, we can take your 6 sulcatas. And then 10 minutes later, I have 5 sulcatas. Oh, great, we can house 11. And then that turned into 13. So having to come up with housing for 100-pound tortoises, and there's 13 of them, is just an amazing feat for us to be able to accomplish and be able to keep those animals safe. And housing 13 sulcatas was an obstacle. So being able to use a dog run that people use normally outside for their dog, to be able to set it up so that those sulcatas could still be outside and also contained and not break out, was a huge accomplishment at the fairgrounds for us.
Yes, it was. And those sulcatas were so much fun. And if it weren't for the fact that they're 100 pounds, I would definitely have one in my living room right now. All right, Jenny, let's hear from you, and then we'll finish up with Scott.
Yeah, so I think our for the shelter, our biggest obstacle was evacuating the shelter in the middle of fires, when people are still arriving in your parking lot trying to bring their animals to us, and having to, send them off to the fairgrounds. We had a lot of animals in care, and we had to clear them out of the shelter and set up a new one at the fairgrounds. And like Scott said, it's something we've never done before. We did it, and I think we did it pretty darn well, but it was a lot of work. It was quite taxing on the body. I wasn't that used to that much physical activity. Got me back in shape. So I think that was our biggest obstacle. And then the most rewarding part for me is just being able to be there for our community when they need us. And some people came to us not to drop off their animals. Maybe they needed pet food, and they were able to stay at a friend's house and couch surf, and they were able to keep their dog, but they left all supplies back in their home. So we did offer supplies and that kind of thing. Yeah, it was an amazing disaster, but we made it through, and everybody went home safe.
Which is the most important part, right? Scott, what were some of your obstacles that you saw, but what were some of those big rewarding moments as well?
Yeah, I'll start with the obstacle, and it has a lot to do with the size of our staff. We're a pretty good sized organization. We have 75 employees, but I also like to tell people, and I think our own staff knows this, we're staffed pretty lean. We don't have a lot of extra staff. We get by and do all the things really, really well with, I would, again, I say a lean staff. Um, we have many people who are incredible, but we only have one of them, and we had to manage multiple sites where we needed expertise at all of these sites. So we were calling each other a lot of texts. But I think that, to me, that was the biggest challenge, is having to do everything we did with such a lean staff, which is really, it's how a nonprofit should run. But it makes it challenging in times like this. In terms of most rewarding, I didn't really have a single moment. And I think, like a lot of us have said, it's just kind of looking back on it and seeing how the staff came together. We had people, some people doing what they don't normally do. We have staff from different departments interacting with each other. There's going to be little disagreements on how to do things, but in the end, there's just a ton of respect and care for each other, and it's just great seeing people come together like that. Andrea mentioned I scaled a wall, so she didn't give the backstory. I went inside the ballroom where we were housing our exotic animals and other not wildlife. We were housing exotic animals, and I'll say that the staff chose to house geese in the men's room because they're mostly a female staff, and probably thinking they weren't going to need to use the men's room in that ballroom. I needed to use the men's room. I'll just say it. Number one, I looked in there and I saw the geese, and I thought, I'm going to have my back turned to these geese, and I know what geese can do. And I'd rather not have that moment for everyone to be laughing at for decades. So I was in a little bit of a hurry when I left the ballroom. So that's why I jumped over the fence instead of walking around. There you have it. Tales from the disaster.
It was a great moment. And as I just turned around and I'm like, oh, it's my boss. It was wonderful. And I greatly appreciated it. And I think that's what was so, yeah, what was so great about the staff, is I don't think, any of us expected that we would do some of the things that we would do. Stacy, as, a manager of a development permit, livestock, moving and coordinating is not on your day-to-day task list. So yeah, it's fun to see the flexibility in everybody. So first question, we're going to hear from Jenny and Sierra. It's kind of a two-part question. And this is about volunteers. How did we get volunteers that came into the shelter to help us? How did we move our animals from the shelter? I guess I'm kind of making this a three-part. Move the animals from the shelter to the fairgrounds. What kind of vehicles did we use? What kind of people came? Jenny, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, so it started out with just the shelter staff. Saturday morning around, 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, we decided, okay, it's time to start evacuating. So we started rounding up our animals and putting them in crates, and volunteers that were actually at the shelter that day started to take notice and asked if they could help. So they helped us start, crating cats and dogs and that kind of thing. We started loading them into some of our SPCA vehicles. We used one of HI's vans. We used the disaster box truck. We used customer service offsite adoption van. So we just started loading, and as our volunteers saw more of this happening, they just started calling their friends and family. Some of our foster volunteers heard we were evacuating, so we actually have one foster family. They do a lot of bottle baby kitten fostering for us. They showed up in a U-Haul, and they said, how can we help? So that was pretty incredible. Some of our volunteers that were out at the shelter that day actually left, went home, and got their own personal trucks. We did have some staff members who brought in their own personal larger vehicles so they could help us. box up and ship off anybody we could. So we did get to the point where we had so many people self-deploying and we didn't know who some of the people were. We did have to say thank you, but no thank you, because the response was just so huge. But we used any type of vehicle that was available to us.
What a
Yeah.
wonderful problem to have when you have too many people who want to help. And then Sierra, I know you guys had to play a little bit of the game of Tetris with your crew.
We implemented the trucks that we normally use for wildlife rescues and essentially cleaned them completely out and started packing all of our boxed animals into that. We had the back of one of the trucks full of our group of geese. We had the sulcatas loaded up in the back of trucks. We had one of our staff members that had both a covered trailer and then a flatbed trailer. So we were able to use those. I think it took us 2 trips to get all of the cages and tables and supplies that we needed. You know, some of the parrots are pretty large. They need large cages. That full-grown iguana needed a huge cage. So we were able to put all of those supplies on the trailers that one of our staff members had, and then using our wildlife trucks to get all of the animals and supplies moved over to the fairgrounds.
And watching everybody move, I mean, it was such a well-oiled machine. You would have thought we had been planning for this for the longest time. Stacy, we had a very specific question that I know that you had to do some research on, and we want to know, what do you feed a llama? And I'm going to add to that question, on top of what do we feed a llama, can you talk about some of the different types of food that was donated, not just the dog and cat food, but we also had some other kind of unique items?
Yes, so with our llamas, we had a couple of llamas and alpacas. One of the things with our larger livestock animals, the owners would actually normally do the care and feeding themselves. We would provide a safe shelter, but the owners would provide the diet, which is great because all of the horses have a unique diet for the most part. So it actually gave the owners some sort of routine so they could come out, you know, take care of those animals, feed them. Llamas in a home environment are normally going to be in some sort of pasture, so they're going to eat more of the grasses, things like that. But you can actually buy bagged food, so it's more like a grain grass kind of combo that you can feed to them. But I will say, you know, with the variety of species, we did want to make sure we had food on hand because not all the owners would ever be able to get back. So we wanted to make sure if someone couldn't feed their chickens, we had chicken feed. So we had chicken feed, duck feed, goat feed, anything and everything. Our community was phenomenal because one of the things is we did have the sulcatas that the Sierra and her team were taking care of. We did have chickens, we did have ducks. So one of the great things is, you know, we said we need this. Well, the community was overwhelming. If we said we needed green vegetables, we got truckloads of green vegetables, which, you know, is the good and bad of. We had basically a salad bar piled up outside of the fairgrounds at some point in time. But one thing we do is, as the owners return home, we let them take whatever they need. In some cases, horses are returning to a burned out property. They're not going to have hay. Chickens are returning out to burned out coops. So whatever we can provide to make that homecoming much easier, we will do it. Bags of carrots, take it. And the owners were so excited. It's just that little perk, like, oh my gosh, I get my pet and you're sending me home with food. Yes, it was donated for the animals. Please take it home. Provide the care that you need. This is one less thing you should have to worry about. But yes, there was a fair amount of Googling. Scott and myself would laugh sometimes because we're like, because he would source out some of the items we needed. And it's like, do you know what this is and what do we do with it? But we are all much more educated now.
That was one of those things I know, Stacey, you and I worked on, you know, kind of on the fly, as we're at the fairground up for horses coming in. And then this huge truckload of hay came. And it's like, okay, well, what horse is this for? And they were like, oh, it's just for you. And so Stacey and I kind of looked at each other. It's like, oh, now we need to come up with a separate area to put all the, just, this is for you, taken. I mean, there was, everything under them that got dropped off in those areas.
Yeah, so our community was incredibly supportive. Same thing with the cats and dogs. Anything that we needed, if we would put it out on a wish list, if we'd put it out on social media, within hours that item would get delivered, which was incredible. So one thing is, I know for our next, we don't ever want to plan for the next disaster, but we always are planning for the next disasters. We have a lot of supplies and our care. So that'll really help us be better prepared the next time.
Yeah, definitely. So this next question, we're going to hear from Rosanna, and then we'll hear from Stacy again as well. Rosanna, the question is, what type of resources or types of supplies do we wish the community would have provided during a crisis? Are there things that you can think of that we wish we had a little bit more of, blah, whatever that item might be?
So the thing with disasters is that everyone is different. So we don't know necessarily what we need when we start. We could end up with, you know, instead of 1,100 different species, we could end up with 1,100 dogs or 1,100 sulcatas, or, you know, someone has to evacuate 300 steelhead trout. It's such a unique experience. The thing that would really help us as an agency and the community as a whole, honestly, is people being prepared themselves. Knowing that if you have 2 dogs, 16 ducks, 2 goats, and a camel, that if you have to evacuate, you have to get those somewhere. Because the more people that are prepared and have all those resources available, makes it easier on us as a whole to be able to respond to that disaster. And that would be the biggest help overall. Sometimes we do need things. Of course, there's things I'd love. I'd love another horse trailer. Sure, that'd be great. But it's not necessarily that we would know ahead of time. And then people who want to help. We get so many spontaneous volunteers during disasters. So many people who call us up. Hi, my name's Bob. I've got a truck and a trailer and I want to help you. And we may not have time in that moment to be able to call Bob back and say, like, great, what's your experience? Let's do it. But if Bob calls us when we're not in the middle of a fire or a flood, and that's something we can get on our books before it starts, that would be a huge help.
That's a really good point. And I know that that's something that we started doing as this disaster was going on, is not being able to call people back, but starting that list and starting to get people on it. And Stacey, can you think of anything that you wish we had?
No, my feedback is similar to Rosanna's. Is this disaster covered such a large geographic area, so there were so many different needs. As when you're talking about Las Palmas versus Cachagua, that's 2 very different areas, 2 very different types of pets. For the most part, you're going to have chickens versus a lot more cats and dogs. So day to day, our needs are going to be so different, whether you are taking in 50 dogs or whether you're taking in 50 chickens. And so we did, like I said, get some great donated items. So we have an inventory. So we're looking for long-term storage. How can we safely house these items that will have some longevity to them, whether they're feeding containers or things like that, because hopefully we're not going to need them anytime soon. But if we need them 5 years from now, we want them to be in good condition. So that's actually something internally we've been looking like, how do we store these wonderful assets so the next time we deploy on a moment's notice, we'll have availability. We have a lot of the essentials. We have a disaster truck. We have donors who have really supported our disaster response because we are in a fire-prone community. And so we have the essentials, but it's just being able to cater to maybe more of these unique needs. And like Rosanna mentioned, also the horse trailer. We're dealing with a lot of rural areas, and I actually went out on a couple of the horse rescues, and your equipment makes a huge difference. And so that's once again something we'll be looking at, is what is going to be the safest for the animal, what's going to be the safest for our staff. Not all equipment is built the same, and so when you're loading animals that have actually never been loaded, what is going to be the safest way for you to do that, whether it's a horse, whether it's something our wildlife and exotic team is taking care of, whether it's dogs and cats. We want to make sure everyone comes out of this safe. And it's going to be stressful for everyone, but is there something we need? So we'll continue to look at that for the weeks and months to come. But once again, community was phenomenal. Thank you so much. I mean, if we said I want a leash, we'd get 50 of them. So it was incredible.
Okay, I do have one thing that I would like to throw out there. Our disaster truck is amazing, but we need like 10 of them.
More disaster trucks. And I think one like with some like shelves, like a like a 2-story, a double-decker maybe. I mean, no.
Well, and even
and
also, I mean, the community, like I said, they were providing for the cats and dogs. They were providing for our staff. They would just show up with free food in some cases. And the way to our staff's heart is free food. It's amazing. Like you can have a 15-hour workday. You're crying because this is happening. You're stressed because this is happening. Someone gives you a Kit Kat and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the best day ever. And so there were local restaurants that were great. There were people who specifically donated just to feed us, which it's amazing when you think of the little details in a disaster, but having our team operating at the best they could under the conditions is something that is very worthy, because they were working 10-hour days, 12-hour days. I mean, when people are in our adoption intake area at 2 o'clock in the morning, that's not normal. And then they turn around and come back to work the next day. So once again, kudos to our staff. They really were incredible.
I can't tell you how excited I saw staff get over a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken. The fairgrounds staff were amazing. I know. Staff was working really hard all day, and the fairgrounds staff, their maintenance guy, who was actually a huge help to us as well, and he noticed how hard everybody was working, and nobody really had time to stop and eat. And so he went out and he brought us Kentucky Fried Chicken, and the staff was over the moon.
I didn't hear about the Kentucky Fried Chicken. I missed out on that. But what I was gonna say was, in terms of feeding our staff, what's the easiest thing to give a bunch of people is you order pizzas. And we thought, we can't even do that. We don't want to leave out 5 large pizzas and have everyone reaching in there and grabbing a slice of pizza. We just, we thought we even have to do that differently and serve our staff or have individually wrapped items. And we had so many people to thank and recognize. And I'm thinking now of a supporter who has a couple of McDonald's in our area, and she could not have been easier to work with and could not have been happier to help us, and she herself and a staff member were delivering McDonald's breakfast, I think for 4 or 5 days in a row. And we're going to the fairgrounds and coming back, bringing them to the shelter where things were individually wrapped with special COVID handling messages on them from McDonald's. And it was just remarkable, really was.
When Rosanna told me that I was going to be in charge of feeding the SPCA staff, I was like, oh, awesome. Everyone loves pizza, and it's going to be pizza for everyone every day. And then like one of the first words out of our mouth was like, you can't do pizza. And I'm sure my face just popped because I was like, I'm sorry. So what am I supposed to feed everybody? And we had some good stuff and came up with some creative solutions. And I now have a COVID-friendly list of places I can get food that's all individually wrapped. I don't know if anyone else saw our special guest of Rocky and Amanda's camera there for a second. I did. I appreciated it, Amanda. All right. So before, I'm going to actually come back to you real here, Jenny, because we were talking about, we're talking about working with other people. We were talking about for food because that is what kind of ruled our life there for a while. But getting food donated and working with places to help feed everybody are not the only places that we worked with. I know before the disaster started, we had animals in shelter up for adoption, and we needed to make room for the animals that were coming in. So we worked with some other shelters, right, that would help us take those the adopted animals or
adoptable. Yes, we actually had one shelter reach out to me when the fire began, and now I feel so bad. I think it was East Bay SPCA. Anyway, he called me. He said, I know you're probably really busy. I see that there are multiple fires in your area. Can I drive down and take your adoptables so you can free up more space in the shelter for evacuees? And I said, absolutely. Come on down. You can take whatever you want. And so he did. He took the rest of our adoptable dogs. They did take some cats and kittens as well. So that was fantastic.
And did we see that happen during previous fires before, or is this kind of a new thing?
No, it's a thing amongst shelters. A lot of shelters do it, and we've helped other areas when there are disasters in other areas. We've helped with animals from hurricanes and other states. And so if you see a disaster somewhere, a lot of humane societies will reach out and say, hey, I see what's going on. Do you guys need help with your animals so you can free up space for evacuees? And oftentimes the shelters will say thanks, but no thanks. We've had such a huge response that we don't need any more help. Luckily in this case, we didn't have a ton of animals available for adoption anywhere or in shelter care, because since COVID began, we have not seen the number of animals that we would typically, both stray and surrender. The numbers are literally trickling in compared to, you know, the kittens that would normally pour into us in the summer. So that was also, it was nice.
Hey, Andrea, I want just to add on to what Jenny said. I don't know if this is one of the questions, but I have heard this question from others outside of the SPCA, including some of our supporters. And they asked, how are you good at this? Or how does your staff know what to do? And Jenny touched on this, but we have a number of staff. I'm just looking at the faces here. I know, gosh, we send our staff out to other areas that are impacted by disasters, and we do it for a couple reasons. One, it's just a good thing to do to help out another organization in the animal welfare field that is suffering, that needs our help. And we've done that on multiple occasions. We've sent staff to help out, run temporary shelters, work in the field, helping with rescues. You know, Rosanna, and I'm trying to think who else. Rosanna, who else joined you in the campfire a couple of years ago in the wine country?
Ben went up.
Ben, Laura Lockwood from Wildlife, Jamie Lima from the barn, and Stacy Dubuque.
Yeah, I knew there's
responded.
a couple. But we've done this on multiple occasions. Again, it's the right thing to do. It's how we help each other. And it also helps us prepare for those situations that hit us. I mean, having that experience, you see what works, you see what doesn't work. Every disaster is different. You learn a little bit from each one, and we'll continue to do that. There were a number of shelters. We had fires all over California, and shelters were reaching out to other shelters just as we were finishing with our fire response. And had we not just come off that incredible period, we probably would have sent staff out to help. But we just, again, had just kind of wrapped up things on our end. And we had a number of staff that didn't have any days off, that needed some time off, that otherwise we probably would have sent people out to other parts of the state. And who knows? I mean, the fire season's not over. God forbid something terrible doesn't happen. I know things are happening in Southern California. I just saw on the listserv that I'm part of, a shelter was in an area where about 90,000 people were being evacuated. So that meant potential of many, many animals coming to them. They had a number of animals in their shelter. And within, I would say, an hour of putting a message out, they had a number of shelters very close to them volunteer to come by and get their adoptable animals from them. So that's how our field works. Yeah,
you've got, and I think you have that camaraderie because, you know, heaven forbid it's ever you, but if it is, you would want the same. And Rosanna, we actually had not only some organizations help take our animals, but we also had some people deploy people to help us as well, right?
So as Jenny mentioned, in the sheltering community, there's a lot of reaching out and, hey, what do you need help with and how can we assist you? And sometimes that is bodies. So yes, we did have 2 different agencies and 1 retired agency, or retired from an agency, that actually came out to assist us and give us some bodies to help out as well.
They were real fun to work with. So we still have more questions. And again, anybody put questions into that chat and we'll get to them too. I'm having a ton of fun with these. Sierra, we had a really great question that came in, and it's not specifically what happened during the fires, but it's more of the aftermath. And how are we seeing our wildlife since post fires? Are we seeing any big changes that you've noticed?
We get that question a lot, not just related to the fires, but kind of COVID in general. And for the most part, just overall, this year could throw us a heck of a wallop with everything else, fires and COVID and all that. But wildlife is just business as usual. We haven't really noticed anything out of the ordinary. We haven't really seen any numbers decreasing or increasing. It's just steady as she goes. So things might be going crazy for us humans, but not for wildlife. just business as usual.
And I think it's also really important to remember that, you know, for our cats and our dogs, you know, they live in our homes, they live in barns or, you know, aviaries or things like that. But wild animals, you know, they should be able to get free of those flames and the things coming out. So that's always a big plus. And Rosanna, we had another question that came in that I think is going to be a really good one for you. And this question particularly pertains to how we as the SPCA worked with frontline responders, or first responders, excuse me, but also other frontline people. I know you had lots and lots of meetings with lots of people doing coordination behind the scenes that I imagine doing, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. We're very lucky in the sense that we have a seat in our County Office of Emergency Services. So every time a disaster happens, they open up an emergency operations center, and we are what is referred to as the animal care and shelter unit leader, which means that if there is a disaster that requires some sort of mass care and shelter, they will activate us along with either the Red Cross or with the county, whoever's doing the sheltering. And that puts us directly in line with all of our first responders. And that enables us to not only shelter animals at different places or get the supplies that we need to do that, but also allows us to go to many briefings throughout the days with our local law enforcement, whoever the fire lead is, which in this case is mostly CAL FIRE or Los Padres National Forest. And that enables us to get the best on-time information. So we are very blessed that we have such a good relationship with our county that allows us to be in that seat and allows us to have all that info. Because then we can tell people, yes, you do need to evacuate right now, or you have, you know, we've got a little bit more time based on the real-time information that we have. Let's see how we can make this the easiest and best move for everybody. It's absolutely critical for us to have that information in order to do our job well.
Yeah, again, that coordination. And I know there were also times where Rosanna would hand her phone to Buddy, and she's like, I need to do this. So answer my phone when it rings because it's going to be so-and-so. And I was like, how do you have all this stuff inside your brain? You were always on it. So we had another question, and Amanda, I'm going to pose this one to you. I think a question is probably on everyone's mind at some point or another. How can we tell people, our donors, people who need to prepare for a disaster, what are some of the things that we can tell them to do? How can we best prepare our community and our neighbors for what to do with their own pets as a disaster may hit?
Well, and I think we kind of touched a little bit earlier, but you know, having a game plan for your animal, being ready. Whether if it's cats and dogs, having collars on them is always a huge part of that. You want to, you know, if they're not crate trained, getting them comfortable to go in crates and being transported. If you have a neighbor who, if you're not home and your neighbor can help out, having your neighbor have access to your house and having the animals comfortable, them coming in and taking them out is really important. Having pictures of your animals on your cell phone is a huge one, I would say, on there, especially if you're unable to get back to your house. If you're at work and a fire happens and that fire line comes up and they're not allowing people coming in, having a picture of whether it's horses or, you know, just having that on there. Vaccination records on your phone in all contacts. I know online you can order them, and pet stores I believe have them too. You can buy the little window decals that you can actually place on your window to say there's one cat, 2 dogs in there, and a contact number. You know, a lot of times that first responders will be looking for those. So having those to identify what's on your property if you are living somewhere that could be caught behind a fire line on there. So having animals prepared. If you have livestock, if you have horses, pigs, you name it on that round, getting them trained to be trailer trained is a huge one. That's something that we came across a lot with horses that have never been in a trailer, and trying to get them into a trailer during a fire is not easy. So having, if you're able to train your animals to evacuate the property, that is a huge help for the owners. They also have, if you have livestock, there are ways to mark your livestock. They have great collars now for horses that you can put the owner information on. There's also paint that's made for livestock like that. It's just you don't not talking about regular spray paint, but there is a safe animal toxic-free paint to identify them. So those are really great things on there. On our website, we have all this information. Also, we also have like the lovely little packets that have that have pet listings for if you are going to be staying at hotels. We have that on our website. So if you can't stay somewhere, be ready to be able to take the animals. So having the more information ready at your fingertips is going to make you less panicked to be able to take your animals. I don't know if I keep going if you want, but I think that's kind of the topic points. Everyone that knows me knows I will just keep on there.
No, I think you hit all of the marks, and even Rosanna even put in the chat box that you can have those disaster packets as soon as you held yours up, so it worked out perfectly. And Rosanna, are those packets that anybody off the street can just come in to the shelter and pick up, or is it something that we can mail out to people?
We can do both right now, since we're not having a ton of public come into the shelter due to COVID. I would recommend that people they can actually call me or the front desk, and we can get one set up for them. And then I'm happy to mail them out. I do usually do a couple of dozen of those after each disaster.
And they're a huge, and Amanda, you touched on something that I didn't even really think of when we talked about the disaster preparedness, which was the SPCA website. I feel that our staff behind the scenes working on the website did such a phenomenal job of keeping that updated. And I know all of us could email Beth and just say like, oh, I need this added to our wish list, or we can't go here, we need to go there. And I mean, just like that, it was changed, which was a really, really incredible moment. Then we had another question that came into the chat box, which I think will be a really good question for Jenny and Stacy and Sierra, which were, we'd like some explanation on some of your creative housing solutions of how you and Sierra's like, oh man, because similar to what Scott had said, I had my boyfriend out there and he was getting ready to use the restroom, and Sierra's like, you have to use the ladies' room. And I laughed because I was like, she's kidding. She's just pulling one over on you. That trickster Sierra. And she then told me to go look in the men's room. And I was like, that seems inappropriate. I feel like I'm going to be the joke. But yeah, sure enough, there were some geese, and those were some large geese. Sierra, what were some of your other creative solutions?
Yeah, well, we house some of the traditional farm animals like ducks and geese and some peafowl that the owner also had some exotic pets. So we wanted to try and keep them together. So we had 8 geese, and we didn't have a safe place to house them outside where they'd be safe and have access to water. So we put them in the men's bathroom. We used an X-Pen to cover the urinals so they wouldn't jump around in the urinals. We set up a kiddie pool that people normally have for their toddlers, filled that up with water. There was a floor drain. It was all tile, very easy to clean. We also had 2 random ducks, and it's the same thing with the geese. They needed access to water, and we couldn't do anything safely outside, but they didn't get along with the geese. So we used the handicap stall and had them housed in the handicap stall of the same men's bathroom. And then the sulcatas, like I mentioned, we set up the dog run in the fenced-in courtyard part that we were at the fairgrounds. And then there was a half wall in the building that we were able to block off for the little chicks. They were peacock babies, so they couldn't really fly. And so we just laid a giant tarp down, used an X-Pen to block off that portion, and laid down straw so they were able to be free in there. And there was 1 random chicken in there with them, and they all got along. Oh, and 1 little duckling. So it's just making it up as we go to make the animals as comfortable and safe as possible.
Sarah used the bar as well in the ballroom.
Yeah, that was the half wall portion
Yeah.
to put all the little ducklings and stuff in.
That's right. It sounds like the beginning of a joke. The lady walks into a bar. Oh, I muted myself. I said it sounds like the beginning of a joke there. Lady walks into a bar with a peacock under one arm and a duck under the other, and we did it.
Well, I think what's here is we kind of gloss over the fact she did say ballroom. So this is the beautiful ballroom at the Monterey Fairgrounds where there might be a wedding or a fancy event. And so one thing about the fairgrounds, none of us have ever worked out of there. We've been there for social events. We've been there for the fair or the beer festival or something, never anything with this many animals. I mean, the traditional fair will have animals, but not in their ballrooms. And so when we were first scouting it out, we went and looked at where the shelter animals could go. It's a huge empty room with carpet. You know, we went to where the exotics are going to be. Once again, a beautiful ballroom with stunning brand new carpet. So the first thing we did was bought the biggest tarp imaginable and started tarping, because when we left, we wanted to make sure we returned the properties as we found them, and everyone did such an amazing job. But yeah, it was a legit ballroom. So there's probably a wedding happening there next year quite a few times.
I did also not mention that this giant ballroom had ceiling fans. And some of these birds can fly, and if you're not careful while you're cleaning them, they can get out. So we had to make it a standard protocol, obviously, to turn the fans off while we were cleaning the bird cages, so that if they happened to get out, they would not run into the fan. Just another hurdle to take into consideration with using a ballroom and housing birds.
I went to deliver supplies to Sierra, and one of said birds got out and attacked me. I'm a chicken. I'm afraid of birds. It landed on my back.
It landed on her back, and she was fine.
Go ahead, Stacy. I was going to say these are the stories I love hearing.
We also use the Monterey Equestrian Center, which is in fact an equestrian center, which is great. So they were able to easily accommodate some of our larger animals. We did get additional stalls, so we built those out. But if you've ever met Jamie Lima, she is our barn manager. She is incredibly creative and thinking outside the box. And so when I went for a site visit, she was so proud to start showing me around. And it's just one of those like, oh no, these photos can't ever go public, because first of all, we took over, I believe, an old animal shelter. It was an old city animal shelter. So it hadn't been operational for quite a few years. So our standards were changed. It's a disaster after all. But as she's walking through, she's proudly showing me an empty restroom that now has chickens on it. So of course there's no water in the bathroom, but we love bathrooms for animals, but there's chickens on top of the toilet. They're perched. The next room's an office with some old filing cabinets. There's chickens perched on top of filing cabinets. I mean, but it worked. The chickens were completely safe. It had a lot of space for them. I mean, it's far safer than anywhere they would have been. But it's just one of those, you walk around and go, I can't believe we're doing this, but it works. You know, they rigged lighting to go through because they were going to be there after hours, so it was going to be dark. But yeah, there was definitely a lot of handiwork happening after hours by our staff, and they did a great job. But yeah, cats and dogs, you're working out of our shelter, which is normally so set. We have our great kennels, we have all these great spaces. I mean, every animal then had to live out of a crate. And I always say Jenny and her staff were incredible. These animals were getting walked every day. So we had volunteers, and that was their job, to make sure the dogs would get, I don't know if it's twice a day or once a day, but they were still getting a great standard of care, even though the housing was very different than what we would normally provide.
Yeah, and with Stacy seeing those pictures from Jamie of all the chickens, and you know, chickens like to roost, and so it's the best pictures that I think I got throughout this whole thing was the chickens that were in the bathroom, and they had made the old toilet into a little coop, and the chicken laid an egg in the toilet. It was absolutely fantastic. So that definitely made my day. So Jenny, let's go with you. Maybe not so much creative solutions when it comes to housing, because yeah, as Stacy just mentioned, all the animals were in kennels, but like for the cats, I mean, you also had to fit a litter box in there, clean that litter box. And then I also want to touch on the volunteers that came to walk the dogs, because your guys' buddy system for walking and cleaning was pure genius. So I want you to talk about that.
Yeah, so the first day wasn't that organized. And we actually became overwhelmed with volunteers who wanted to help us with the dogs and cats. And so we actually did have to pare that down and stop accepting new volunteers. And we did have to implement some new rules. We actually had to implement a quiet time for our dogs because we had so many people wanting to come out and walk them and visit with them and give them love that the dogs were never given a quiet time just to rest. And that they absolutely need that time to just settle. They've just been through a really traumatic event. They have all these new weird people around them. They have all these other animals around them. So that was one of the first things we implemented. And then we did implement a buddy system when it came time to clean. Our dogs are in crates. How do you clean a crate with a dog in it? You can't. So we would have, a volunteer take dog out, take it for a walk, and then either a staff member or another volunteer would stay, clean out that crate, and then once it was done with its walk, it would have a nice, clean, safe place to stay. Cats were a little tricky. They were in another ballroom type of room with carpeting and a dance floor, actually, and a bar. The cats didn't do any dancing. But the volunteers did. The cats were really angry about the situation. They didn't like being in crates and around strangers, and cats don't do well with being moved. So staff did have to get kind of creative and figure out ways to clean those litter boxes that are at the back of the cage. So actually one of our customer care people, she started using a broom handle, and it worked great because we could slide the litter pans right to the front of the cages, pull them out, empty them, and slide it back in. We had a ton of volunteers out there. It was amazing. Staff was tired, and they were working long shifts. So to have some relief from the volunteers during the day, we couldn't have done it without them.
Yeah, the volunteers throughout, to see that many volunteering coordinators definitely have their work cut out for them on that one. So we had another question that came in about bedding, which is, huge. And at the shelter, one of my favorite parts of my donor tours is there's the laundry room. We have an epic washer and dryer that is in use 24/7. But I guess maybe we'll obviously Jenny, and then I know Stacy, you've had a little bit of bedding as well to deal with in a non-washing fashion. So Jenny, what did we do with the bedding that we were using at the fairgrounds?
We were shipping it back to the shelter. So we did still have to find either staff or volunteers to stay behind at the shelter. We didn't have a mandatory evacuation. So we were able to go back to the building and do laundry there. But it was funny. Many of you know Lisa Heffler. She was our disaster queen. She was there the first day. She's helping us clean up, and she looks at me and she's like, "What's your plan for laundry?" I was like, "Lisa, are you trying to catch me here slipping? I have a plan." Anyway, it was funny. So yeah, we did have to transport it back and forth, which wasn't ideal, but we were very thankful to have that as an option. In the past, our laundry area did go down actually during our capital campaign project. So when we were building our new shelter, our laundry room had to move outside underneath our education center, and we only had one washing machine. We actually had to source laundry services for our laundry for a period, and they do not want bedding with dog or cat poop on it. So that was really hard. So we were really thankful to still have those facilities.
And Stacy, you at the fairgrounds, there was lots of bedding there. Did we have to do any creative anything over there, or is just lots of scoop and a straw?
No, yeah, we had, so a lot of it was, thankfully for the large animals and the livestock, that fairgrounds area is definitely set up for cleaning up those areas. And then we were also getting so many donations of towels and blankets, so we were never without. So even though we might have dirties piling up, we could easily source clean from the fairgrounds and then start to do catch up at the end.
Yeah, we had a very large donation of towels pretty early on, and I set up a little donation area at the fairgrounds and sent out a text. And within like a minute, people were already there, like, oh, I need this and I need that. And it was really fantastic. So those are all of the questions that I had listed for those of us that are on the call. Did anyone else have any other questions? Feel free to put it in the chat box, or staff, is there anything that you wanted to share that we maybe didn't answer during one of those questions?
I think we've all said it, but it's just such a huge thanks to everyone. We got through this because everyone was supporting us, and it was, whether it was a phone call, whether it was someone stopping us on the street, whether it was someone coming out. I know I'm gonna cry now, but one of the first days I went outside, our parking lot was mayhem. The skies were scary. Some little girl gave me a $10 bill and I was about bawling. I was like, thank you. So it truly makes a difference. Every single dollar that we got made all of this work possible, because this was a massive, massive, expensive operation. So you guys made this all possible. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that, Stacy. Well, if I don't have any other questions, I'm going to send it over to Scott for our final farewell.
All right. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks for putting this together. It's a lot of fun. Not always fun in the moment when we're dealing with something like that, but it's fun looking back on it and telling some of the stories. And again, I'm just so glad that so many of you who supported us are still interested in hearing about what worked, what didn't work, and how we handled everything. It's just great to have you all here. We say this a lot. We are, or the level of care and the level of services and response that we're able to provide, we're only able to do that because of the support that we receive in our community. Those of you on this call, you're remarkable, and you allow us to do the good work that we do. So thank you so much for that. Let's all knock on wood at the same time. Fire season's not over. Let's not get things so exciting as they were a couple months ago. And hopefully we'll all be seeing each other in person sometime soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And thank you, all of my staffers, for joining us. We really appreciate you, donors. And we'll talk with y'all later. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.